Hope that this morning you guys woke up and you gave thanks to the Lord. It's simple prayer is good enough, right? It's good morning. It's thank you, God. This is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm dealing with. This is where I want to go. This is where I've been. Help me with this. This is what I'm struggling with. This is where I hope to be. And I thank you for what you've done. And it's that simple. So it's been a minute since I made a video. I really love this channel because it's very low pressure, you know. And I made a short and I was, talking about maturity, right? And some of my more supportive viewers of the channel understood immediately what I was referring to, right? When I said we got to mature as African American people, and how we do struggle with regression within the Black community. And that video was, again, a different context, right? I did an entire podcast just kind of elaborating on this because I think that this is something that we have to hold hand in hand, right, as African American people, and that is compassion and accountability, right? So I talked about the power really in reclaiming agency over our lives, and I talked about how conversations about compassion, right, for one another and conversations about accountability can't really go hand in hand because they would be contradicting one another, right? We can't talk about white supremacy, the standards that we're, held towards without the resources, and talk about being accountable in the same breath, right? Because that would cancel one another out, and both are very vital to our well-being and to our development in our conversations about uplifting one another and bettering ourselves, right? And I won't be here long, but I wanted to talk about something because someone made a comment under the video. And though it was frustrating, right? Because I feel like, again, when we have certain conversations, we don't always have time. I know for myself as a creator, like I said, I'm on limited time right now. We don't always have time to hit on every little thing, right? And that's one of the things I do love about these type of conversations, even meeting people in passing, right? These conversations are very heavy, and they can take hours, right, to kind of sit and digest and process, right? Because there's so much context and there's a lot of nuance and there's, it's very complex and it's all these things, right? So I know I promised you guys a video about Black women and Black women dating within a lower socioeconomic background, what that looks like in terms of agency, protection, access, right? All these different things, right? The lack of role models. And that's a very heavy video. And I didn't drop it. And so I won't touch on that today, but we are going to kind of be talking about something that I've been thinking a lot about, in my own life, and just so happened to see a video with Michelle Obama, where Mrs. Obama was talking about, getting to know people, right? A lot of her dating advice and much of what she says, which I'm going to tie back into the commentator who was under my video, and said how I was speaking from a privileged background, right? Now, granted, in that context, I was not, talking about people who don't have, or, certain things. And you guys know, like I said, we touch on a lot of that here. I touch on a lot of that. I've been touching on all of that in Renaissance Room. And my channel is always about that anyway. So it was out of context, but I want to kind of talk to it. I want to speak to that because I do believe that sometimes when we say certain things, right, and we try to give advice and we try to be as general and, sharing our wisdom, right, and we try to speak to people how we can come from privileged backgrounds, right? And so we obviously know with Michelle Obama, pretty much straight through and through, right? Comes from a pretty good family. Met Barack. She was in certain spaces where there were other educated people, right? Brothers, more specifically, right? Relationally, right? So she's on the right path. She's in the right rooms. And, her life is definitely the embodiment of Black excellence, right? She was able to achieve that. And we won't, erase people's struggles. We won't erase the hard work that it takes, just quite inevitably. We won't erase the things that she's endured. I still feel to this day, I just don't think Michelle Obama needs a podcast. I don't know what it is that I think about first ladies that I think should be more regal. I think they should be more regal. I don't think that we should hear from first ladies. I don't know. I think it's part of like social media. And I'm not saying that she shouldn't have a voice. I'm not saying that her having a voice has been impacting people and inspire people. But one thing I know, and even like having a platform, right? Let me just say this. Like, I know I don't want to be famous because the amount of spiritual warfare like is crazy. Two, I can't speak to everybody, right? Just like how I made that video and I tried to be encouraging and how it doesn't always land. You see what I'm saying? I think fame and having a large platform, having an audience is a really big responsibility. You have to be very mindful of what you say. You have to be aware to such an extent that you can see your limitations, you can see your privilege, and you have to be humble enough to know that you don't know everything, right? And that's not just one person or another. That's just realizing that all you know and all I know and all you know, right, is what you know. And for many of us, especially people who do kind of have this background of through and through, right, straight through, I've heard someone talk about Michelle and just kind of mention her book more so, and just kind of saying how, in reading her memoir, she really didn't have any struggles. She didn't come from, even though she may have come from poverty or she was in, South Side Chicago, she didn't run into certain environments and, meet certain people and have to really kind of navigate difficult, relational dynamics with like she didn't really have certain things, she didn't have to endure certain things. And so in that, sometimes I think as advocates for the Black community, we have to be mindful that we can't be everywhere, right? And we can't speak to everything because we haven't experienced everything. Even if, perhaps we have shared some of the same challenges, socioeconomically, and we're Black and, we may not come from wealth, right? But there are some people who don't have good families, right? And so all these things. And so I say all that to say, this is the whole purpose of this video. Michelle was talking about how, to get to know somebody, you guys need to take time with each other. And, that's kind of like an old adage. I think a lot of elder people, give that advice. And I do think there is wisdom in that, obviously. But, she just kind of spoke about, how love takes time, how, you guys should travel together. You need to go to their house and meet their families on the weekends and see how their family engage on the holiday. Really this extensive evaluation process and getting to know someone. She talked about like traveling abroad. You guys need to, and these are just examples, of course. I'm sure she wasn't speaking so matter-of-factly. I'm going to get to my point here. Just bear with me. And, you need to travel abroad. You need to be somewhere where, that you guys don't know the language. She spoke about being around each other's families on the holidays, right? And the first thing that really crossed my mind in that was how shame-inducing that is, right? And there was a comment under the video that was everything I was thinking about, right? There was this woman who kind of, or maybe I'm assuming it was a woman, it was an anonymous page, but, they just shared how, if their spouse had met their family, they probably wouldn't have got married because their family was so dysfunctional, right? And Michelle was kind of alluding to that, right? Like, how do this person and their family interact, right? And I think that this is so incredibly important, just bringing it full circle. Okay, if you're still here, just bringing it full circle. Because one of the things I realized within the Black community is that we do not have the straight through and through. Okay, on average, we don't have the straight through and through. And I think what's so unfortunate for so many of us is because we are compared to and I don't want to say it's white normative standards, right? Because many of the standards that we do have, yes, it's rooted in white supremacy, but it's also kind of just American tradition, right? Like we are Americans and we do have a certain way of doing things. I know we are so familiar with this country, but we do have our own set of customs, right? And, for many African-American people, we just don't have that straight through and through. And so when the commentator had said, if I had done all these things, right, I probably would have never got married, right? If my husband had met my family, I probably would have never got married. And I just think about how so many of us are really kind of sitting in a space of shame, how so many of us are rooted in shame because we don't really measure up with these certain normatives, right? We don't come from perfect families and perfect backgrounds. And so when you start talking about that and how it relates to dating and you hear, dating advice from Michelle Obama, it definitely can. And I think that's also in part why we do have a lot of singles, because I think we got to meet one another with more compassion, right? I don't think that certain rules apply straight through and through, and I don't think that many of the people who speak to these things, who, have all of the influence and success, I don't think they realize that, in speaking about certain things, of course they can, we can only speak from our experience, but I don't think that they realize that, much of what they say is not something that a lot of people can relate to. You know what I mean? So, in relating to the commentator who was under my post and was like, how would you feel if a person said this? Now, me personally, I don't view myself to be a Michelle Obama. I don't think I have that kind of audience. I don't think I have that kind of influence. Like I said, I personally wouldn't want to be famous because, me personally, I don't want to deal with that level of warfare, right? That's crazy. But I do think at the end of the day, I do try to be very mindful, when I talk about certain things, when I share certain things, when I am trying to encourage African-American people, because I 100%, get that many of us are not coming from certain backgrounds and we are going to be lacking in certain areas, but at the same time, I am going to uplift us and I am going to try to be encouraging. And so I say all that to say, I do think that many people do struggle, relationally and all the things, okay, because of shame. And, when you hear Michelle Obama give this advice and she's like, at the end of the day, you got to meet their family. You guys need to be traveling together. Like, that's just not realistic. Like, who's doing that in dating? Right. And how many of us do come from dysfunctional families? Even if you do have, how many of us come from families that are broken, right? Families that you guys aren't even talking. Right. And so I think that creates a lot of isolation, and I think that makes a lot of Black people feel unworthy and they feel just insecure, not really able to like date and, feel confident because it's like, you don't come from that background. I'm not tight with my mama, and so you're like, dang, like you see that. Right. And you show up to the family function or you're evaluating people from that space. That's hard. That's hard. And I don't even think it's about, being a Howard graduate or, anything like that. I just think that that's life. I think there are people who do have, who have reached a certain point of like success and achieving some level of Black excellence who still come from dysfunction, so it's harmful. And like I said, the thing about Michelle Obama and first ladies in general, I just don't think they need podcasts. I just don't think that they should be speaking to certain things. I think that there is a certain level of like, I don't want to say like, I don't want to use the word demure. I don't want to use the word demure, but I just think, when you have that level of, especially when you're talking about Michelle Obama, right? First Black lady, like, come on. And honestly, I think that a lot of Michelle, doing a lot of the talking, and that's the thing too, I have to be mindful of this as well. But again, I'm not Michelle Obama. See, I'm just a regular girl, you can do more harm than good by talking too much, right? Like the Bible says that a fool uttereth all that they know, right? Like you can hurt people with your words and saying things, especially when you're speaking to the Black community, and especially when you come straight through and through like Michelle Obama, She's out of touch. I think she's out of touch, yes, being the first lady, but I think she doesn't realize the influence and the power and like everything that she carries. And that really grieves me because I don't know why Michelle feels the need to try to be like relatable. I don't know why she feels the need to kind of bring herself down a couple levels. You know what I mean? Like being the first lady, regardless if you're into politics or not, regardless if you see it as like, oh, it's no big deal. You know what I mean? Like who cares? And like, no, that's very honorable. And I said that in a video. I made an entire video about it, just how, being honorable to like your husband, I just feel like Michelle comes out and she's in these common spaces and she's kind of just like rattling off about certain things. And it's just like, no real self-awareness about certain things. And I don't, it's not that she's, not wise or that she can't be expressive in her own right. And, but I just think, I don't know. I just think there's really something very elegant about first ladies back in the day, who just weren't trying to be in common